Hey guys, tonight we step into the vast deserts of ancient Nubia, where the evening air cools at last after a day spent chasing gold beneath an unforgiving sun. You stand on a ridge of dark stone and look across a landscape painted in copper colors. Far below, tiny campfires wait like scattered stars on the earth, while distant hills conceal veins of precious metal that rulers, merchants, and dreamers have sought for centuries. The wind brushes softly across your face, carrying dust, the faint smell of smoke, and the promise of a long night beneath one of the clearest skies imaginable. It is beautiful. It is peaceful. It is also a place where, if you arrive with modern expectations about air conditioning, cold drinks, and ergonomic office chairs, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to post your location and local time down in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is listening from as we drift through history together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in Nubia, a region stretching along the Nile south of Egypt, in lands that today belong largely to Sudan. For thousands of years, Nubia was famous for one thing above many others: gold. In fact, some historians believe that the very name Nubia may be connected to an ancient word for gold, though historians still argue whether that connection is truly correct or merely a tempting coincidence. Either way, gold is everywhere in the stories told about this land. You begin your day before sunrise. The camp is quiet except for the occasional cough, the rustle of blankets, and the low murmur of someone already awake. The stars are fading. The eastern horizon glows pale blue. Nobody rushes. That may sound surprising, considering that everyone is preparing for difficult labor, but desert life teaches patience. The sun will become fierce soon enough. There is no need to invite trouble early. You rise slowly from a woven mat. The ground beneath you still holds a trace of nighttime coolness. For a few precious moments, the desert feels gentle. Nearby, another miner stretches and yawns. A third carefully shakes sand from his sandals. Somewhere a donkey complains loudly about existing. The donkey's complaint is understandable. If donkeys had historians, entire scrolls would probably be devoted to explaining how humans keep inventing creative ways to make them carry rocks. As dawn arrives, the camp comes alive. Small cooking fires are lit. Water jars are checked. Tool bundles are gathered. You take a simple breakfast. Nothing extravagant. Ancient mining settlements were not exactly famous for luxury buffets. A meal might include bread, dates, grains, or dried foods that travel well in harsh conditions. The food is practical. Practicality, you quickly learn, is the unofficial ruler of the desert. Around you, workers prepare for another day in the mines. Some are experienced veterans who have spent years reading the landscape. Others are younger faces still learning which rocks matter and which are simply rocks pretending to be important. The hills ahead seem quiet. Yet beneath them lies the reason entire kingdoms care about this place: gold. Ancient Egypt famously valued Nubian gold. During periods when Egyptian pharaohs controlled parts of Nubia, enormous efforts were devoted to extracting precious metal from these lands. Gold flowed northward and became jewelry, temple offerings, diplomatic gifts, and symbols of royal authority. You look toward the rocky ridges. At first glance they appear barren. Then someone points out faint scars in the stone. Old workings, ancient excavations. Places where generations before you chipped, hammered, and searched. The landscape itself has become a record book. You begin walking toward the mining area. The journey is quiet. Boots crunch against gravel. Wind slides between rocky outcrops. Occasionally someone gestures toward a landmark known only to local workers. There are no road signs, no painted arrows, no helpful navigation app announcing, "Turn left at the suspiciously shaped boulder." Instead, memory guides everything. The experienced miners know every ridge and valley. They know where shade appears briefly during midday. They know where storms sometimes sweep through. They know which paths waste energy and which conserve it. Knowledge here is almost as valuable as gold, perhaps more valuable. Gold cannot help much if you become lost. As sunlight grows stronger, details emerge across the terrain. The rocks glow red, brown, and black. Small lizards dart between cracks. Birds occasionally cross the brightening sky. The desert is not empty. It simply speaks quietly. You reach one of the mining areas. The work has not fully begun yet, but preparations are underway. Tools are inspected, water supplies are arranged, plans are discussed. There is a rhythm to everything. Nothing feels chaotic. That surprises you. Modern imagination sometimes pictures ancient mining camps as non-stop scenes of frantic activity. Yet much of life revolves around routines refined over generations. People know their tasks. They know their partners. They know the day's challenges before the first hammer strikes. A miner beside you kneels and examines a section of exposed stone. His eyes search carefully for signs invisible to you. You stare at the rock. It looks like a rock. A perfectly respectable rock. A rock that has clearly dedicated itself to being a rock. Yet he notices subtle clues. Mineral streaks, colors, dot textures. Tiny indicators that might reveal hidden treasure. This ability takes years to learn. And even then, success is never guaranteed. The desert guards its secrets stubbornly. A breeze moves across the hillside. The camp behind you grows smaller in the distance. Ahead lies labor. But beyond that labor lies something equally important. Evening, because tonight's story is not merely about mining gold. It is about what happens afterward. It is about the hours when tools are set aside, when fires glow softly, when stories travel farther than caravans, when workers gaze upward at stars that seem close enough to touch. For now, though, the day is only beginning. The sun climbs steadily, shadows shorten. Voices become more purposeful. You feel anticipation settle over the landscape. Another day in Nubia has arrived. And somewhere beyond the heat and dust waiting ahead, a peaceful desert evening is already preparing its welcome. The first hammer strike arrives with a sharp crack that echoes across the hillside. You hear another, then another. Soon the quiet dawn gives way to a steady rhythm of stone meeting stone, a sound that has repeated here for generations. The echoes bounce among the ridges and fade into the desert beyond. You step carefully across uneven ground, following experienced miners toward an exposed section of rock. The morning air is still bearable, though everyone knows that condition has an expiration date. The sun, much like an overly enthusiastic supervisor, is already preparing to make its presence known. You kneel beside a vein running through the stone. To your untrained eyes, it looks unimpressive. Ancient gold mining rarely resembles the sparkling scenes imagined in modern movies. Most of the time, the treasure is hidden inside hard rock. Before anyone can collect gold, they must first find the right stone and then convince that stone to stop being so stubborn. That second part can take a while. Workers examine surfaces for clues left by geology. Certain mineral colors and formations suggest the possibility of gold-bearing quartz. Knowledge passes from older miners to younger ones through observation and repetition. No printed manuals exist, no online tutorials appear. No cheerful instructor announces 5 simple tricks to make your mountain reveal treasure. Instead, wisdom travels through human memory. A veteran miner points to a pale streak running through darker stone. You study it carefully. It still looks mostly like a rock, but apparently it is a promising rock. And in this profession, promising rocks are worth investigating. The first stage involves breaking larger sections free. Stone hammers, pounders, and other simple tools do much of the work. Ancient miners throughout Nubia and neighboring regions often relied on hard stone implements to fracture rock before crushing it further. This is not quick labor. Each strike demands effort. Each crack represents progress measured in inches rather than miles. Sweat begins appearing on foreheads. The temperature rises steadily. You soon discover that mining requires patience far beyond what most modern people possess. Today, if a website takes 3 extra seconds to load, somebody somewhere experiences a personal tragedy. Here, a single section of rock may occupy workers for hours. Nobody expects instant results. The desert has trained everyone to think differently. You watch as a group coordinates their efforts. One worker loosens fragments, another clears debris, a third carries promising material toward processing areas. The routine appears almost choreographed, not because anyone is performing for an audience, because efficiency matters. Energy is precious, water is precious, time spent under the sun is precious. Nothing is wasted if it can be avoided. As the morning progresses, the hillside grows louder, stone chips scatter, dust drifts through sunlight. Occasionally someone pauses to drink water or stretch aching muscles. Conversation comes in short bursts. A joke here, a comment there, a prediction about weather, an argument about which donkey is the laziest. Interestingly, that final debate may never be resolved. Each donkey seems determined to contribute fresh evidence. You carry a basket of broken rock toward another work area. The load feels heavy. By the halfway point, you begin reconsidering several life decisions. The experienced workers appear unimpressed by your suffering. They have carried such loads countless times. For them, this is simply Tuesday, or whatever the ancient equivalent of Tuesday happens to be. The processing area sits slightly lower on the slope. Here the work becomes even more detailed. Larger rocks are broken into smaller pieces, fragments are sorted. Material believed to contain gold receives additional attention. The goal is to separate valuable ore from ordinary stone. Ancient mining communities developed surprisingly sophisticated techniques over centuries. Though methods varied by location and era, crushing and grinding ore were essential steps. You watch workers use grinding stones. The process is repetitive, back and forth, after hour. The movements become almost hypnotic. If someone created a modern fitness program based entirely on ancient mining labor, membership numbers would probably collapse by lunchtime. Yet there is something impressive about the endurance surrounding you. No one boasts. No one delivers dramatic speeches. People simply continue. The work itself demands respect. By late morning, the desert has transformed. The coolness of dawn feels like a distant memory. Heat radiates from the ground. Heat radiates from the rocks. Heat radiates from seemingly every object in existence. Even the air feels warm. You begin understanding why desert communities structure their lives carefully around temperature. Shade becomes valuable real estate. A small overhang attracts workers during brief pauses. Several miners gather beneath it. Water jars are passed around. Conversations become more relaxed. One older worker shares a story about a relative who supposedly discovered a rich vein after following a particularly stubborn goat. The listeners laugh. Whether the story is true hardly matters. Mining camps everywhere seem to produce legends. Some involve lucky animals. Some involve dreams. Some involve mysterious signs. Historians still argue whether certain ancient mining traditions were based on practical observation, religious beliefs, or simply stories repeated often enough to become accepted wisdom. Human beings have always enjoyed explaining good fortune. Sometimes the explanation makes perfect sense. Sometimes the explanation involves a goat with suspiciously advanced geological expertise. The rest period ends. Workers return to their tasks. You follow, the rhythm resumes. Strike, crack, lift, carry the sort. Repeat. The landscape around you appears unchanged, yet tiny differences accumulate. A pile of broken stone grows larger. A trench extends farther. Another basket fills. Progress arrives slowly but steadily. This is one of the defining realities of ancient mining. Gold rarely reveals itself dramatically. Instead, it emerges through persistence. A little effort, then more effort, then much more effort. Eventually, if fortune cooperates, small rewards appear. As noon approaches, sunlight blazes overhead. The sky becomes an endless field of blue. You glance toward the horizon. Beyond these hills lie caravan routes, settlements, and the Nile itself. Beyond them lie kingdoms eager for gold. The metal extracted here may someday decorate temples. It may become jewelry worn by nobles. It may travel hundreds of miles from the place where you now stand sweating beside a rocky slope. That connection feels remarkable. A fragment of stone beneath your hand could eventually become part of history. Of course, at this particular moment, it mostly feels heavy, very heavy. The miners around you continue working with practiced determination. Their movements reflect generations of accumulated experience. They understand these hills. They understand this labor. And most importantly, they understand that when the day's work finally ends, the quiet desert evening waiting beyond the heat will feel all the sweeter. The thought alone is enough to keep everyone moving. By the time the sun reaches its highest point, the desert feels less like a place and more like a giant oven that has become emotionally invested in your discomfort. The rocks are hot. The air is hot. Even your shadow seems tired. You pause beside a cluster of water jars protected beneath a simple shade structure made from poles and woven material. The shade is thin, but at this stage of the day it feels almost magical. Several miners have gathered nearby. Nobody speaks much at first. The effort of surviving the afternoon heat encourages a certain economy of words. A nod becomes a conversation, a shrug becomes a speech, a raised eyebrow becomes a detailed philosophical essay. You carefully drink from a water vessel. The water is not cold. The concept of ice belongs firmly in the category of impossible luxuries. Still, it is life itself. In ancient Nubia, as in nearly every desert society, water determines everything: the location of settlements, the timing of journeys, the length of workdays, the chances of survival. A gold vein may attract attention, but water keeps people alive long enough to mine it. You notice how carefully every drop is treated. No one spills water casually, no one wastes it. Everyone understands its value through direct experience. That understanding shapes daily habits from childhood onward. The practical knowledge required for desert life is enormous. You begin noticing examples everywhere. Workers know which paths offer brief shade at certain hours. They know how to wrap cloth around their heads to reduce sun exposure. They understand how to pace themselves. Most importantly, they know when not to push too hard. The desert punishes arrogance, and unlike a disappointed schoolteacher, it rarely gives second chances. A miner sitting nearby adjusts a cloth covering his neck and glances toward the horizon. Without looking at any instrument, he predicts the possibility of stronger winds later in the day. You wonder how he knows. Then you remember that people living close to nature often observe details modern populations rarely notice: the shape of clouds, the direction of dust, changes in air movement. Tiny clues accumulate into practical forecasts. Historians know that ancient communities throughout northeastern Africa developed sophisticated environmental knowledge adapted to local conditions. You are watching that knowledge in action. The break eventually ends. Nobody celebrates this development, yet everyone rises. Work resumes. You carry tools toward another excavation site farther along the ridge. The route crosses a stretch of exposed ground where loose gravel shifts beneath your feet. The sun continues blazing overhead. Somewhere a lizard darts across a rock and disappears into a crack. Frankly, the lizard seems to have the correct strategy. You briefly consider joining it, but mining communities generally frown upon workers hiding inside tiny reptile-sized shelters during business hours. As the afternoon progresses, the predicted winds arrive. At first they seem pleasant. A cool breeze would be welcome. Unfortunately, this is not a cool breeze. This is desert wind. The distinction becomes obvious when dust begins swirling through the air. Cloth coverings are adjusted, eyes narrow, conversations pause. The wind gathers strength and sends sheets of fine sand drifting across the landscape. Nothing dangerous, nothing dramatic, just enough to remind everyone who truly controls the environment. The desert, as always, maintains authority. You pull fabric across your mouth. Around you, experienced workers continue almost without interruption. They have dealt with this many times before. In fact, one older miner appears mildly annoyed that the dust is interfering with his ability to complain about the heat. Multitasking remains important. The stormlet passes gradually. Visions improves. The world settles once more into bright sunlight and distant horizons. Work continues. While carrying another basket of stone, you find yourself wondering about the people who occupied these regions centuries earlier. Nubia possesses one of Africa's oldest and richest histories. Powerful kingdoms rose here, including Kerma, Napata, and Meroe. At various times, Nubian rulers competed with Egypt, traded with Egypt, and even ruled Egypt. One mainstream historical fact often surprises modern audiences. Nubian kings once governed Egypt as the 25th dynasty, sometimes called the Kushite dynasty. The gold extracted from regions like these contributed to the wealth and influence of those kingdoms. The thought adds weight to the landscape. Every hill seems connected to larger stories. Every stone feels linked to distant courts and temples, yet daily life remains grounded in immediate concerns: water, food tools, shade. You pass a worker examining unusual markings on a section of exposed rock. He studies them thoughtfully. Another miner joins him. A discussion begins. Several theories emerge. Perhaps the marks indicate promising ore. Perhaps they reflect natural weathering. Perhaps they are simply the result of an ancient goat conducting unauthorized geological research. No conclusion is reached. Historians still argue whether certain markings found at ancient mining sites represent deliberate prospecting signs. ownership indicators, or natural features later interpreted as meaningful. Questions linger. The desert keeps many secrets. That mystery becomes part of daily life. Not every question receives an answer. Not every tunnel yields treasure. Not every story can be verified. As afternoon slowly advances, the light changes, the harsh white glare softens slightly. Shadows begin lengthening. You notice the difference immediately. Energy returns to conversations. People straighten their backs more often. The promise of evening becomes visible. And evening matters. You have already heard miners mention it repeatedly throughout the day. Not because work stops entirely, tasks remain. Meals must be prepared. Tools require maintenance. Animals need attention. Yet evening brings relief. It offers community. The hardest heat loosens its grip. The desert becomes a different world. One younger worker points toward distant hills. His grandfather, he says, claimed hidden gold deposits exist there. Another laughs and says every grandfather in Nubia claims hidden gold deposits exist somewhere. The joke earns approval. You suspect it has survived several generations. Some things are universal. Modern families pass around stories about mysterious relatives who almost became millionaires. Ancient mining families apparently did exactly the same thing. The sun drifts lower, colors deepen across the rocks. A sense of anticipation spreads through the camp. The day's labor is not finished yet, but the balance is shifting. Morning belonged to effort, midday belonged to endurance. Soon evening will belong to something gentler. The desert wind softens, dust settles, the ridges glow gold beneath the declining sunlight. And as you continue walking among the workers, carrying the final loads of the afternoon, you begin to understand why these quiet evenings remain treasured memories in communities built around such demanding labor. The afternoon slowly loosens its grip on the desert. You notice it first in the shadows. They stretch farther across the rocky slopes, reaching into places that have baked beneath sunlight all day. The sharp edges of the landscape soften, colors deepen, browns become bronze, black stones shine with hints of purple. Even the dust seems calmer around you. Workers begin finishing their final tasks. No horn signals the end of labor. No official announcement echoes across the hills. Instead, the change happens naturally. One basket is emptied, one tool is stored, one last section of stone is examined. The day's rhythm gradually transforms. You carry a hammer back toward camp and feel the difference immediately. The air remains warm, but no longer feels determined to melt your eyebrows. That alone counts as progress. A line of donkeys appears along a narrow path winding between rocky outcrops. The animals move patiently beneath loads of equipment and supplies. One pauses for no apparent reason. Another stares thoughtfully into the distance. A third seems engaged in private philosophical reflection. Nobody hurries them. Centuries before modern traffic jams, donkeys were already teaching humanity valuable lessons about patience. You follow the path downward. As the camp comes into view, you notice activity increasing rather than decreasing. Work in the mine may be ending, but evening life is beginning. Small groups gather near cooking areas. Others organize supplies. Several workers inspect water containers. Children move between tents and shelters. Voices grow more relaxed. The entire settlement seems to exhale. Beyond the camp stretches one of the great forces shaping life in this region: trade. Though you stand far from major cities, you are not isolated. Ancient Nubia occupied an important position connecting Central Africa, Northeastern Africa, Egypt and regions beyond. Trade routes crossed deserts, followed river corridors, and linked distant peoples through networks of exchange. You climb a small rise near camp and gaze toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those distant ridges, caravans travel, perhaps not visible today, perhaps days away, but always present in the larger story. Gold mined from these hills rarely remains here. It journeys outward, sometimes north toward Egypt, sometimes toward regional centers of power, sometimes into wider networks connecting multiple cultures. The thought is strangely comforting. Even in this remote desert, people remain connected to a broader world. A worker beside you points toward a faint track cutting across the landscape. He explains that merchants occasionally appear carrying goods unavailable in local settlements: fine cloth, special tools, decorative objects, rare foods, news. Especially news. Human beings have always loved information about places they have never seen. The arrival of travelers transforms ordinary evenings. Stories spread quickly, rumors spread even faster. You can already imagine how it works. A caravan arrives, someone mentions a distant king, someone else claims to know what happened. A third person insists the first two are completely wrong. Within an hour, the settlement possesses 17 different versions of the same event. Some traditions never change. You settle near a group preparing evening fires. The sky above begins shifting through shades of gold and orange. Smoke curls upward. The smell of cooking drifts across camp. People move at a slower pace now. There is less urgency, less strain. The difficult part of the day has passed. Nubia, an older miner, tells younger workers about trade journeys he witnessed years earlier. His hands move as he speaks. The desert itself becomes a map. He describes routes crossing vast distances, water sources hidden among barren terrain. Landmarks used for navigation. The listeners watch closely. Knowledge matters here. Trade routes do not exist merely as lines on a map. They exist as memories shared from one generation to the next. Mainstream historians know that caravan networks played crucial roles throughout Nubian history, helping move gold, ivory, animal products, and many other goods across regions. Without those routes, much of the wealth produced here could never reach distant markets. You imagine a small nugget of gold beginning its journey from one of today's excavation sites. First it leaves the mine, then the settlement, then the desert. Eventually it might decorate a temple hundreds of miles away. Perhaps a royal court, perhaps an elite household, perhaps an object that survives thousands of years before archaeologists discover it. Meanwhile, the miner who helped uncover it spends the evening sharing jokes around a fire. History often works that way. The grand and the ordinary live side by side. A gentle breeze moves through camp. You welcome it immediately. After the afternoon heat, even modest cooling feels luxurious. Someone begins arranging supplies for the following day. Tools are counted, equipment is inspected, nothing elaborate, just practical preparation. Desert communities learn to think ahead. A forgotten tool tomorrow can become a serious problem. A missing water container can become a disaster. Careful habits develop naturally. One worker notices a crack forming in a handle and sets it aside for repair later. You make a mental note. Sewer maintenance clearly occupies an important place in evening routines. That task will become more visible as the night progresses. The sky continues darkening. A few early stars appear overhead. The transformation feels almost magical. Hours earlier, the landscape shimmered beneath relentless sunlight. Now cool shadows gather among the rocks. The hills seem larger, quieter. Ancient people often associated deserts with mystery, spirits, and hidden powers. Standing here, you understand why distant becomes difficult to judge. Dot shanties blur softly. The world grows still. A younger worker suddenly points toward the horizon. For a moment, everyone looks. A faint trail of dust rises in the distance. Travelers, perhaps, or animals, or simply wind moving across open ground. Nobody knows. The possibility alone sparks discussion. Historians still argue whether some isolated desert settlements receive travelers more frequently than archaeological evidence currently suggests. Written records provide clues, but many details remain uncertain. The desert preserves some secrets and erases others. Darkness approaches steadily. The campfires glow brighter. Voices mingle with the crackling of wood. The labor of the day begins slipping into memory. Not forgotten, simply placed aside. Tomorrow will bring more mining, more stone, more heat, more dust. But tonight belongs to something else. Tonight belongs to conversation, food, stories, and the comforting knowledge that the stars will soon rise over Nubia's golden hills. And as the final sunlight fades beyond the horizon, you find yourself settling more deeply into the gentle rhythm of camp life, surrounded by people whose evenings matter every bit as much as their work. The first cooking fire crackles loudly enough to attract attention. The second answers from across the camp. Soon, dozens of small flames flicker among shelters, work areas, and open spaces between clusters of people. What had seemed like a rugged mining settlement only an hour earlier now feels surprisingly welcoming. You settle near one of the larger fires. The heat from the flames is gentle compared to the sun's punishment earlier in the day. That distinction matters. The sun demands respect. A campfire simply asks for company. Around you, workers gather in small groups. Some sit on stones, others crouch comfortably on woven mats. A few continue tending chores while listening to conversations drifting through the evening air. The smell of food slowly spreads across the settlement. It is not a feast. Most ancient mining communities relied on practical meals built around available ingredients and trade connections. Bread, grains, legumes, dates, onions, dried foods, and occasionally meat all had their place depending on time, location, and resources. Still, after a long day of labor, simple food becomes extraordinary. You watch a worker carefully stir a pot while another prepares flatbread nearby. Nobody rushes. The stars are beginning to appear. The hardest work is finished. For now, that is enough. Someone hands you a piece of warm bread. You accept immediately. This may not qualify as a royal banquet, but after carrying rocks beneath desert sunlight, your standards have become pleasantly flexible. A younger miner takes a bite and declares it the finest bread in Nubia. An older worker laughs. The same declaration, he says, is made every evening. The younger miner points out that it continues being true every evening. The argument ends in a draw, as many great historical debates have. Conversation begins flowing more freely. People discuss the day's work. Which excavation sites seem promising? Which sections of rock remain frustrating? Which donkey nearly caused trouble? The donkey discussion receives considerable attention. You are beginning to suspect that donkeys function as both transportation and entertainment. One story involves an animal that wandered away carrying a bundle of tools several years ago. The tale grows more dramatic with each retelling. By now the donkey may have crossed half the continent and founded its own kingdom. No one appears concerned about historical accuracy. A good story is a good story. Nearby, another group exchanges family news. One worker recently received word from relatives living closer to the Nile. Another describes preparations for an upcoming marriage celebration. A third mentions a cousin whose talent for storytelling apparently exceeds his talent for useful work. The comment earns laughter. Family teasing, it seems, is timeless. You listen as voices blend together beneath the darkening sky. The camp feels connected. That connection matters more than you initially realized. Mining is difficult. Desert life is demanding. Without companionship, the burden would feel much heavier. Shared meals create space for people to recover emotionally as well as physically. Historians studying ancient labor communities often note the importance of social bonds in maintaining stability and cooperation. You are witnessing that principle firsthand. Food nourishes the body. Conversation nourishes everything else. An older miner begins describing conditions from many years earlier. You immediately notice younger listeners gathering closer. Experience carries authority. The old worker recalls seasons when mining activity expanded significantly. He remembers caravans arriving more frequently. He remembers visitors from distant regions. Some details may have grown polished through repetition. Mera has a habit of improving stories slightly, perhaps considerably. Still, the listeners remain captivated. The past comes alive through his words. He describes nights when campfires stretched across entire valleys. He describes celebrations following successful discoveries. He describes storms that transformed familiar landscapes overnight. Historians still argue whether certain accounts of dramatic desert weather in ancient records reflect literal events or the natural tendency of storytellers to enhance memorable experiences. The listeners, however, do not seem particularly worried about source criticism. They are enjoying themselves. And honestly, after spending all day breaking rocks, they have earned that right. A child wanders into the gathering, carrying a small carved object. Several adults examine it. The carving appears simple but carefully made. Perhaps an animal, perhaps a symbolic figure. Small crafts like these often occupy spare moments in ancient communities. Not everything revolves around work. Human beings create things because creating feels good. The impulse is ancient. You watch the child proudly explain details of the carving. The adults nod thoughtfully. One offers gentle suggestions, another praises the craftsmanship. The child beams. Encouragement travels across generations as naturally as stories. The meal continues. The night grows cooler. More stars emerge overhead. Without modern city lights, the sky reveals astonishing detail. Bands of stars stretch from horizon to horizon. Constellations become vivid. The heavens seem almost crowded. You glance upward and understand why ancient societies devoted so much attention to the night sky. It is impossible not to look. A worker notices your fascination and points toward familiar star patterns. Navigation, seasonal awareness, religious symbolism and storytelling all could connect to the heavens. The stars serve many purposes, far more than decoration. Then someone makes a joke about how certain stars appear whenever somebody forgets their chores. The audience laughs. Astronomy and gentle teasing coexist quite comfortably. As the evening deepens, conversations become more reflective. People speak more softly. The crackling fire becomes easier to hear. The scent of smoke drifts upward into the darkness. You feel the accumulated tension of the day fading away. This, perhaps, is the true reward of evening, not luxury, not abundance, simply relief, the chance to sit among friends, to eat, to laugh, to listen, to exist without immediate demands. A miner stretches beside the fire and remarks that tomorrow's rocks will still be waiting. No one disputes this. The rocks possess many qualities. Impatience is not one of them. The comment earns another round of quiet laughter. Around the camp, similar gatherings continue. Food disappears gradually. Stories multiply. The desert cools, and beneath a sky filled with stars, the mining community settles comfortably into the social heart of the evening, where shared meals and shared memories become every bit as valuable as the gold hidden in the hills. The meal slowly comes to an end, but nobody seems eager to leave the fire. A few embers glow bright orange beneath the cooking pots. Sparks drift upward and vanish into the darkness. Around the camp, conversations settle into a gentler rhythm, less focused on food now, and more focused on the pleasure of simply being together. Above you, the stars have fully claimed the sky. Without modern lights to compete with them, they seem almost overwhelming. You tilt your head back and stare upward. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a pale river of light. Thousands upon thousands of stars shimmer overhead. For a moment, the mining camp feels tiny, not insignificant, just comfortably small beneath something vast. Ancient people everywhere spent far more time looking at the night sky than most people do today. In Nubia, as in neighboring Egypt, celestial observation played important roles in navigation, calendars, religious traditions, and daily life. You can understand why. When the stars look this magnificent, ignoring them would almost feel rude. A soft sound drifts through the camp. At first you think it is wind. Then another voice joins it, and another. Someone has begun singing. The melody is simple, slow, easy to follow. Soon several others quietly add their voices. The song floats across the settlement, rising and falling with the night breeze. You do not know every word, but that hardly matters. Music communicates things beyond language. The workers gathered around the fire listen with familiar smiles. Some tap fingers against their knees. Others hum softly. No grand performance is taking place. Nobody is auditioning for a talent competition. This is music woven naturally into everyday life. Human beings have been doing this for thousands of years. A melody shared among friends, a rhythm carried through memory, a moment made gentler by sound. One older miner explains that certain songs have been passed down for generations. The exact details may change, words shift, verses evolve, yet the songs remain. Historians know that oral traditions played vital roles throughout ancient Africa, preserving knowledge, values, and cultural identity, long before written records became widespread in many regions. You are hearing a small piece of that tradition. The singer finishes. Several listeners nod approvingly. Another voice begins a different tune. This one moves a little faster. A few people clap softly to keep time. The rhythm echoes off nearby rocks. Before long, someone jokes that the donkeys probably believe the concert is being held in their honor. A nearby donkey chooses that exact moment to make a loud and rather unmusical noise. The entire gathering bursts into laughter. The donkey, having contributed its artistic opinion, returns to silence. Its review appears mixed. As the laughter fades, storytelling begins blending with music. A worker describes an ancestor who supposedly crossed a dangerous stretch of desert, guided entirely by the stars. The tale grows more dramatic with each sentence. By the end, the ancestor seems capable of navigating through sandstorms, darkness, and possibly several dimensions of reality. No one interrupts. Good stories deserve room to breathe. Historians still argue whether certain legendary desert journeys preserved in oral traditions represent literal events. symbolic narratives, or combinations of both. For the people listening tonight, however, the distinction matters less than the lesson contained within the tale: courage, patience, knowledge, respect for the landscape. The story finishes. Another begins. This one involves a trader who became hopelessly lost, despite claiming to know every route in Nubia. Apparently, his confidence exceeded his navigation skills. The audience finds this deeply amusing. Humanity has always enjoyed stories about overconfident people learning valuable lessons, especially when nobody gets hurt. You listen carefully as the night deepens. The stories flow naturally from one person to another. Nobody formally takes charge. The conversation moves like water. One memory leads to another. One joke inspires a different joke. One observation becomes a story. The campfire creates its own rhythm. The stars continue turning overhead. You notice that younger listeners pay close attention. Children and adolescents sit near adults, absorbing not only entertainment but knowledge. Stories preserve practical information. Songs preserve cultural memory. Even jokes often contain lessons hidden beneath humor. Learning happens constantly, not in classrooms, not through textbooks, through participation, through listening, through being present. A breeze passes through camp, carrying the scent of smoke and warm stone. The temperature has become comfortable now. You remember the afternoon heat and almost struggle to believe it belongs to the same day. The desert changes dramatically between sunlight and darkness. One worker points toward a constellation near the horizon. Several others immediately recognize it. Discussion follows. Different interpretations emerge. Different associations. Ancient cultures often connected star patterns to animals, heroes, spirits, seasonal changes, or practical navigation markers. The sky becomes both map and storybook. You find yourself staring upward again. It is easy to imagine why celestial observation became so important. The stars provide consistency. Empires rise and fall. Mining camps appear and disappear. Trade routes shift. But night after night, familiar patterns return. There is comfort in that reliability. A young miner begins quietly tapping a rhythm on an overturned container. Another joins with a second rhythm. The combined sound creates a gentle beat beneath the conversation, not formal music, just enough to accompany the evening. You suspect this sort of casual creativity happens frequently. People naturally fill quiet moments with expression. A few listeners begin humming along. Others continue talking. The entire camp feels relaxed, connected, at peace. A fringe tradition occasionally mentioned in discussions of ancient desert communities involves the belief that certain songs could help travelers remember routes more easily. Historians debate how widespread such practices truly were, but the idea itself makes sense. Humans remember information remarkably well when it becomes attached to rhythm and melody. Perhaps some travelers really did carry maps in the form of songs. Perhaps others simply enjoyed singing while walking. Either way, the desert must have heard countless melodies over the centuries. The fire crackles softly. The stars shine brighter than ever. The stories continue. And as you sit among miners whose day began with stone hammers and blistering sunlight, you realize that these evening gatherings are every bit as important as the labor itself. Gold may sustain kingdoms, but songs, stories, laughter, and companionship sustain people. The music gradually fades into the background, not because anyone asks it to stop, but because the night itself seems to grow quieter. Conversations become softer. The stars climb higher. The air cools further. You shift closer to the fire and notice several people preparing for something familiar. Not entertainment, not work. Something that exists comfortably between the two. Ritual? Nothing grand is about to happen. No enormous temple rises from the sand. No procession of priests appears from the darkness. Instead, you witness the kind of small spiritual practices that often shape daily life, far more than famous ceremonies ever do. A miner removes a small object from a pouch. Another touches a simple amulet hanging around his neck. Someone quietly murmurs a brief prayer. The gestures are modest, easy to miss, yet they carry meaning. Ancient Nubia possessed a rich spiritual world influenced by local traditions, as well as cultural connections with Egypt. Over centuries, Nubian kingdoms worshipped various deities, developed distinctive religious customs, and built temples across the region. You are seeing religion at its most personal level, not official, not political, simply human. The firelight flickers across thoughtful faces. One older worker explains that before sleeping, he always offers a short prayer for protection. Not only for himself, for his family, for friends, for the workers who will enter the mines again tomorrow. The practice feels comforting. Mining always carries uncertainty. People naturally seek reassurance wherever they can find it. A younger miner adjusts a small carved charm hanging from a cord. He claims it brings luck. Several listeners immediately tease him. One points out that if the charm worked perfectly, he would not need to spend his days breaking rocks. The group laughs. The owner of the charm laughs too. Then he insists that without the charm, things might be much worse. Nobody can prove otherwise. The charm retains its reputation. You examine it more closely. The carving appears worn from years of handling. Perhaps it has accompanied him through countless workdays. Objects like these often become powerful through familiarity alone. They carry memories, confidence, hope. Historians know that amulets played important roles across many ancient cultures, including Nubia and Egypt. People wore them for protection, good fortune, health, and spiritual connection. Some featured gods, others displayed animals or symbolic shapes. The specific meanings varied. The desire behind them remained remarkably consistent. Human beings like feeling protected, especially when tomorrow involves entering a mine. The fire crackles softly. Nearby, a small group discusses local sacred places, certain hills, certain rock formations. Certain locations associated with stories pass through generations. The landscape itself feels alive with meaning. This is hardly unique to Nubia. Across the world, communities have often attached spiritual significance to particular features of the natural environment. A striking mountain, an unusual tree, a spring hidden in the desert. Places become important because people remember them, because stories gather around them, because generations return. One worker points toward a dark ridge visible against the starlit horizon. According to tradition, unusual lights occasionally appear there during certain seasons. Another immediately rolls his eyes. A debate begins. Were the light spirits? Travelers? Natural phenomena? Exaggerated storytelling? Nobody agrees. Historians still argue whether many ancient reports of mysterious lights, sounds, or signs in remote landscapes reflected genuine natural events, spiritual interpretations, or the creative imagination of people spending long nights outdoors. The truth remains elusive. The argument itself, however, appears thoroughly enjoyable. You suspect this conversation has occurred many times before. A miner nearby quietly pours a small amount of water onto the ground. The gesture is brief, respectful, perhaps an offering, perhaps a habit learned from older relatives, perhaps both. Ancient religious life often blended formal beliefs with personal customs. The boundary between the two was rarely rigid. You look around the camp, the atmosphere feels peaceful. Nobody appears anxious. Nobody seems obsessed with performing rituals perfectly. The practices fit naturally into evening life. Just another part of settling down after a difficult day. A child asks an elder about one of the gods associated with protection. The elder responds patiently. Soon a story begins. Several listeners lean closer. You discover that spiritual teachings frequently arrive wrapped inside narratives. Heroes, animals, divine beings, lessons travel farther when carried by stories. The elder describes a deity watching over travelers crossing dangerous regions. The details are fascinating. Some elements sound familiar to traditions found elsewhere. Others feel uniquely tied to Nubian landscapes. Cultures often share certain themes while expressing them differently. Protection, wisdom, fortune, courage, the specifics vary. The needs remain universal. A breeze moves through camp. The flames bend briefly before recovering. You glance upward again. The stars seem brighter than ever. A miner quietly remarks that the heavens make it easier to believe in forces larger than oneself. Nobody argues. Even the most practical workers occasionally become philosophical beneath a sky like this. Then someone points out that the heavens unfortunately do not help carry heavy baskets of rock. The moment of deep reflection immediately collapses into laughter. Balance has been restored. You are beginning to appreciate the humour found throughout camp life. People here do not separate seriousness and laughter as neatly as modern stereotypes might suggest. They can discuss spiritual matters sincerely, then make jokes 30 seconds later. Both belong. both feel natural. One fringe belief occasionally mentioned in discussions of ancient mining communities suggests that some workers interpreted unusual mineral formations as signs of divine favor or warning. Whether such interpretations were widespread remains uncertain. Still, it is easy to imagine miners searching for meaning in landscapes that controlled so much of their lives. Gold itself possesses an almost magical quality. A stone appears ordinary, then hidden within it lies something extraordinary. No wonder ancient people sometimes viewed mining through spiritual lenses. The night continues deepening. More people begin preparing for sleep. Yet many remain beside the fires, talking quietly, reflecting, sharing stories, offering brief prayers, holding small charms, polished smooth by years of use. The day's labor feels far away now. The desert has cooled. The stars stand watch overhead, and among the miners gathered across this ancient Nubian camp, faith and tradition settle gently into the evening, as naturally as the darkness itself. The fires burn lower now, not extinguished, just calmer. The bright flames that illuminated the early evening have settled into glowing beds of coals. Their light flickers across faces, tools, baskets and shelters, creating soft shadows that dance over the ground. Many people are preparing for sleep. Others, however, are only beginning another important part of the evening. You notice it first near a work area on the edge of camp. A small group has gathered around several tools laid neatly on woven mats: hammers, stone pounders, wooden handles, carrying baskets to lengths of rope. Nothing glamorous. Yet every item receives careful attention. After all, tomorrow's work depends on today's maintenance. You walk closer. One miner turns a hammer handle slowly in the firelight, inspecting a thin crack running along the wood. Earlier, during the afternoon, you saw him set it aside for later repair. Now later has arrived. Beside him, another worker is replacing worn lashings that secure a stone head to a wooden shaft. His movements are patient and precise. No one appears rushed. The atmosphere feels almost peaceful. In fact, if you did not know these tools would soon return to the mines, you might mistake the gathering for a hobby club. Ancient Desert Tool Appreciation Society. Membership requirements: own at least one hammer and tolerate excessive dust. The group seems qualified. You sit nearby and watch. The repairs proceed steadily. A length of cord is tightened. A crack is reinforced. A basket is rewoven where strands have loosened. Simple tasks, perhaps, yet essential ones. Throughout history, skilled maintenance has often mattered as much as skilled production. A broken tool can halt work entirely. A repaired tool may serve for years. Ancient mining communities understood this perfectly. Nothing useful was discarded casually. Stores required effort to obtain. Everything had value. One craftsman carefully smooths a rough section of wood using a stone tool. His hands move with the confidence of long experience. You ask how long he has been making repairs. The answer causes several nearby workers to laugh. Apparently, he has been repairing tools for so many years that nobody remembers when he started. Even he seems uncertain. At this point, historians might have an easier time dating a pyramid. The craftsman accepts the teasing with good humor, then immediately points out that everyone complaining about his age keeps bringing him broken equipment. A fair response. The discussion ends in his favor. As work continues, conversations drift naturally toward techniques and problem solving. One miner describes a more durable method for securing a handle. Another recommends a particular type of wood. A third disagrees politely. Knowledge circulates through the group, not formally, not through lectures, through practice, through observation, through shared experience. You realize that evenings like this help preserve skills across generations. A younger worker watches carefully while an elder demonstrates a repair. No announcement declares that teaching is taking place. Yet teaching happens all the same. Historians studying traditional crafts often note that apprenticeship and observation were fundamental methods of learning. You are watching that process unfold beneath the stars. Nearby, another group works on grinding stones used during ore processing. The surfaces must remain effective. Minor adjustments improve performance. Again, the work appears repetitive. Again, it matters enormously. Ancient gold extraction relied heavily on crushing and grinding ore. Well-maintained equipment could make a significant difference. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that mining involved far more than digging. Processing ore required specialized knowledge, labor, and tools at every stage. Gold emerged from systems, not individual moments. You listen as experienced workers compare different mining sites. Some rock types are easier to work. Others resist every effort. One miner swears a particular hillside possesses a bad personality. Another insists the hill is merely misunderstood. The argument becomes surprisingly detailed. At one point, the hill is accused of stubbornness. No representative from the hill appears to defend itself. The verdict remains pending. The night air grows cooler. Several people pull light coverings around their shoulders. The temperature change feels remarkable. Only hours earlier, everyone sought shelter from intense heat. Now the coolness feels welcome. Desert life constantly shifts between extremes. You glance toward the darkness beyond camp. The surrounding hills appear silent. Ancient shafts and excavations lie hidden among shadows. Generations of miners have worked these landscapes. Some camps flourished, others vanished, many left little trace. A worker mentions an old site abandoned long before his grandfather's time. According to local stories, tools occasionally emerge from shifting sand there. Another listener nods. Such discoveries happen from time to time. The desert preserves objects surprisingly well. Historians still argue whether certain isolated artifacts found near ancient mining regions represent forgotten settlements, temporary camps, or seasonal work sites. Evidence exists. Interpretation remains challenging. The desert rarely provides complete explanations. A younger miner asks about an unusual tool hanging nearby. The owner smiles and begins explaining its purpose. Soon half a dozen listeners have gathered. The conversation expands. Questions lead to stories. Stories lead to demonstrations. Demonstrations lead to further questions. You notice once again how naturally learning and socializing blend together. Nobody separates practical knowledge from community life. The two support each other. A repaired basket is held up for inspection. Several workers nod approvingly. Someone jokingly suggests the basket now outranks certain members of the camp due to its reliability. The basket receives widespread respect. Its political ambitions remain unknown. The coals glow softly. Tools gradually disappear into storage. Repairs conclude one by one. People stretch, yawn, prepare for sleep, yet the atmosphere remains warm despite the cooling air. These gatherings accomplish more than maintenance. They strengthen relationships, preserve expertise, create continuity between generations. Tomorrow's labor begins here, in these quiet evening hours, long before the first hammer strike echoes across the hills. And as the final repairs are completed beneath the vast Nubian sky, you begin to appreciate how much of ancient life depended not on dramatic events, but on small acts of care, repeated faithfully night after night. The tool repairs gradually wind down. One by one, hammers are set aside. Baskets are stacked neatly. Coils of rope disappear into storage. The small work circles that filled the camp with quiet activity begin to dissolve. Yet sleep is still some distance away for many people. The night remains young. A few fires continue glowing brightly, and around them clusters of workers linger in conversation. The desert has become cool enough that nobody is eager to crawl beneath blankets just yet. Then a voice calls from the edge of camp. Heads turn, several people stand. You follow their gaze toward the darkness beyond the nearest ridge. At first you see nothing, then movement. A handful of figures approaching beneath the stars. Travelers, not a large caravan, just a small group arriving late in the evening. Nevertheless, their appearance instantly changes the mood. Visitors bring news, and news, in a remote mining settlement, is almost as valuable as fresh water. Almost, let's not get carried away. The travelers enter camp and receive a warm welcome. Water is offered. A place by the fire is provided. Questions immediately begin flying in every direction. Where have you come from? What have you seen? How are conditions near the river? Are the trade routes safe? Has anything interesting happened? The final question receives particular enthusiasm. Humanity's appetite for gossip appears to be one of history's most reliable constants. One traveler settles beside the fire and begins sharing updates. He recently passed through settlements closer to the Nile. Merchants are moving goods. Officials are conducting inspections. Several river communities are preparing for seasonal activities. Nothing earth-shattering. Yet every detail captures attention. To the listeners gathered here, These places might as well be another world. You lean closer as the conversation continues. The traveller describes markets crowded with people, boats moving along the Nile, goods arriving from distant regions, spices, dock styles, craft products, luxury items. The descriptions spark imagination. Many workers rarely leave the mining districts for long periods. Stories become their windows into broader events. Ancient Nubia was deeply connected to regional trade networks. Goods travelled through the Nile corridor, across desert routes, and between neighbouring cultures. You are hearing those connections come alive through first-hand accounts. Another traveller joins the conversation. He claims to have encountered merchants from lands far beyond Nubia. The listeners react immediately. Everyone wants details. The story grows more fascinating with every sentence. Strange languages, unusual clothing, different customs, exotic goods. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate remains open to debate. Travel stories have always possessed a remarkable ability to improve themselves during retelling. The farther away a place is, the more interesting it tends to become. One miner quietly remarks that by next week, these merchants will probably be described as giants riding trained ostriches. The gathering erupts into laughter. Even the storyteller grins. He knows exactly what they mean. A young listener asks whether the travellers have seen the great cities of the north. The answer sparks another discussion. Descriptions of temples, monuments, palaces, crowded streets. You watch expressions change around the fire. Some listeners appear fascinated, others skeptical. A few seem content simply imagining distant places. The desert may be vast, but curiosity reaches farther. A traveller produces a small object acquired during his journey. Nothing especially valuable, just unusual. Immediately it becomes the centre of attention. Hands pass it carefully around the circle. Questions multiply. Observations follow. You realise that novelty carries enormous entertainment value in a world without television, radio or internet. A single unfamiliar object can inspire half an evening of conversation. Honestly, modern social media users would probably understand this perfectly. The scale changes. The instinct remains identical. The discussion shifts toward rumours. Now things become even more entertaining. Apparently, a regional official has made a questionable decision. A merchant supposedly became lost, despite extensive claims about his navigation expertise. Someone else reportedly attempted an ambitious business venture with highly predictable results. Every story receives analysis. Evidence is examined, counter-arguments emerge, no formal conclusions are reached. The process appears extremely satisfying nonetheless. Historians still argue whether certain stories preserved in ancient records originated as factual reports, exaggerated rumours, or humorous cautionary tales passed between travellers. The line separating information and entertainment has never been entirely clear. One older miner listens quietly before sharing his own experience from years earlier. He once travelled farther north than most people in camp. The younger listeners immediately lean forward. Experience commands attention. His account feels calmer than the rumours. More detailed, more grounded, he describes river traffic, market activity, administrative centres, agricultural regions. The picture he paints is vivid. For a few moments, everyone seems transported beyond the desert, beyond the mines, beyond the familiar horizon. That ability may be the greatest gift travellers bring: perspective. The reminder that countless lives unfold elsewhere. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that ancient societies were frequently more interconnected than modern people assume. Trade routes carried not only goods but ideas, stories, technologies, and cultural influences. Even remote settlements participated in wider networks. You are witnessing that process directly. The travellers become storytellers. The listeners become explorers through imagination. A brief debate begins over the fastest route between two distant regions. Maps do not appear. Instead, memory serves as geography. Landmarks, water sources, travel times, hazards. Everyone contributes. Nobody fully agrees. The argument remains friendly. At one point, someone jokingly accuses another of navigating primarily by luck. The accusation receives considerable support. Eventually, the conversation slows. The travellers relax. The listeners settle back. Questions become less frequent. The night deepens around the camp. Above, the stars continue their slow journey across the sky. The fires burn lower. voices soften, yet the stories remain. New information has entered the settlement, new rumors, new possibilities, new dreams. Tomorrow the miners will return to their work among the hills. But tonight, thanks to a few travelers arriving beneath the stars, the world feels larger than it did before, and in a place built around stone, dust, and gold, that expansion of the imagination may be every bit as precious as any treasure hidden underground. The travelers' stories linger long after the conversations begin to fade. You notice it in the way people stare thoughtfully into the fire. A mention of a distant city becomes an image in someone's imagination. A rumor about merchants crossing unknown lands transforms into speculation. A description of the Nile sparks memories among those who have traveled there before. The camp grows quieter, not silent, just softer. The energetic questioning that greeted the visitors has settled into something calmer. Nearby, a child sits beside an older woman, still wide awake despite the late hour. The child's eyes shine with curiosity. The elder notices. She smiles, and without any announcement, another important evening tradition begins. Teaching, not formal lessons, not recitations from scrolls, the kind of learning that happens naturally around fires. The kind that has shaped human communities for thousands of years. Several children drift closer. A few adolescents follow. Adults continue listening as well, pretending they are there for entirely different reasons. Nobody believes them. Good stories attract everyone. The elder points toward the dark hills beyond camp. Those hills, she explains, have witnessed generations of miners, generations of families, generations of travelers. People come and go. The hills remain. The children listen carefully. The lesson sounds simple, yet it contains something deeper. Perspective. Ancient communities often taught values through observation and storytelling rather than direct instruction. The elder is not merely describing geography. She is teaching patience, humility, continuity. You settle comfortably near the edge of the gathering. The firelight flickers across attentive faces. The stars continue shining overhead. The setting feels perfect for memory. A young boy asks how miners learn where to search for gold. The question earns approving nods. A good question. The elder gestures towards several experienced workers sitting nearby. One of them begins answering, not with a lecture, with a story. Years ago, he says, his father taught him how to recognize promising stone. His father learned from a grandfather. The grandfather learned from someone before him. Knowledge travels through people, not through magic, not through luck alone. Observation, practice, experience. The children absorb every word. You can almost see traditions passing from one generation to another. No certificates, no exams, just attention. One girl asks whether the stories about hidden gold deposits are true. Laughter immediately spreads through the group. Apparently, every generation asks this question. The miner smiles. Some stories are true. He says, some are not. The challenge lies in knowing the difference, a useful lesson far beyond mining. Another child wonders whether travelers really visit places as distant as those described earlier. The travelers themselves answer this one. They explain routes, distances, landmarks, the reality of long journeys. Adventure sounds exciting. Blisters, they note, are somewhat less exciting. The children laugh. Several adults nod knowingly. Reality frequently edits romance. A small carved toy appears from somewhere. One child uses it to illustrate a story involving a caravan. Another immediately improves the story by adding a highly intelligent goat. You recognize a familiar theme. Goats continue maintaining suspiciously strong influence over local storytelling. The revised version receives widespread approval. As the stories continue, practical lessons emerge naturally. How to respect water, how to prepare for travel, how to recognize changing weather, how to work cooperatively. The educational content hides inside entertaining narratives. Ancient societies often relied on this approach. People remember stories. Facts attached to stories survive longer. A mainstream historical fact is that oral traditions served as major tools for preserving knowledge across countless cultures before widespread literacy. You are watching that process happen in real time. One elder begins describing the stars. Immediately, several children look upward. Constellations appear, seasonal markers, notification aids. The night sky becomes a classroom, a very beautiful classroom, and one with significantly fewer homework assignments. The children seem pleased about that. A debate develops over the identity of a particular star pattern. Different interpretations emerge, different memories, different traditions. Historians still argue whether certain ancient astronomical associations varied significantly between neighbouring communities or remained broadly consistent across regions. The answer may never be fully known. Tonight's participants appear content with multiple possibilities. One young listener asks what happens if a person forgets important traditions. The question briefly quiets the gathering. Then an elder responds. That is why stories are told, he says. That is why children listen. That is why adults keep repeating things they already know. Memory survives through sharing. The answer hangs gently in the air. The fire crackles softly. Somewhere beyond camp, a night bird calls. The desert feels enormous and peaceful. You realize these evening lessons accomplish something beyond education. They strengthen identity. They remind people who they are, where they belong, what matters. Mining provides work. Community provides meaning. The two depend upon each other. One fringe tale eventually emerges concerning a hidden cavern, supposedly discovered by an ancestor generations earlier. The cave allegedly contained strange markings, unusual stones, and evidence of forgotten visitors. Details vary dramatically depending on who tells the story. Historians would likely approach the account with considerable caution. The children, however, find it magnificent. The mystery alone is enough. Questions follow immediately. Where was the cave? What happened afterward? Could it still exist? The storyteller smiles mysteriously and refuses to answer. An ancient and powerful technique, leave the audience wanting more. Several adults laugh. Apparently the tactic has worked many times before. The hour grows later. Some children begin yawning. Others resist heroically. Parents start guiding younger listeners towards sleeping areas. The gathering gradually thins. Yet the lessons remain, the stories remain, the traditions remain, long after the voices fade. And as another generation carries those memories away beneath the star-filled Nubian sky, you understand that the evening has given them something every bit as valuable as gold. A sense of connection, stretching backward and forward through time. The last of the children drift away toward their sleeping places. Some go willingly. Others negotiate fiercely for a few extra minutes beside the fire. History suggests that parents have been winning this argument for thousands of years. Eventually, though, even the most determined young listeners surrender to sleepiness. The camp grows quieter. The fires burn lower. The stars seem brighter than ever. And now, with fewer voices filling the air, other sounds begin to emerge. The desert itself starts speaking. You hear it first as a faint rustle beyond the nearest ridge. Not alarming, just movement. A reminder that human beings are not the only creatures awake tonight. The workers around the remaining fires notice it too. Nobody appears concerned. They are familiar with these sounds. You, on the other hand, are still learning the nighttime habits of the landscape. A miner points toward a patch of darkness beyond camp. Watch, he says softly. You do. For a moment nothing happens, then a small animal darts between rocks. Quick, silent gone almost immediately, perhaps a desert rodent. Perhaps another tiny creature searching for food beneath the cool night sky. The listeners nod knowingly. The desert becomes much busier after sunset. That surprises many outsiders. From a distance, deserts often appear empty. Yet life thrives here. It simply operates according to different schedules. The daytime belongs largely to heat. The night belongs to movement. You sit quietly and listen. A breeze passes across the camp. Far away, something calls once and then falls silent. The sound echoes faintly between the hills. Nobody seems eager to identify it more specifically. Sometimes, something out there is a perfectly adequate scientific classification. A worker describes tracks he found earlier in the week near a dry wash. The prints belong to a fox, or perhaps a jackal. The distinction becomes the subject of immediate discussion. Several opinions emerge. Each participant sounds completely confident. Naturally, none of them agree. Human beings may have invented civilization, but disagreement appears to be one of our oldest hobbies. The conversation remains friendly. Everyone enjoys the puzzle. Animals played important roles throughout Nubian landscapes. Ancient people living in these regions shared their environment with a wide variety of creatures, from small desert mammals to birds, reptiles, and larger animals near the Nile corridor. Many of those creatures became woven into stories, beliefs, and daily observations. You begin noticing how carefully the miners observe their surroundings. They recognize tracks. They notice changes in animal behavior. They pay attention to signs easily missed by visitors. Life in challenging environments encourages awareness. One older worker points toward the stars and recalls a season when unusual bird migrations signaled changing conditions. Others nod. Knowledge of animals often overlaps with knowledge of weather, travel, and survival. Nothing exists in isolation. The desert teaches connections. A soft flutter passes overhead. Several people glance upward. A bird crosses briefly through the starlight before disappearing into darkness. The sight lasts only seconds. Yet it feels strangely beautiful. A traveller sitting nearby mentions seeing larger birds along portions of the Nile during recent journeys. That observation leads to another chain of stories. Soon people are discussing creatures encountered across different regions. One man describes a particularly bold monkey he once saw near a river settlement. The tale grows steadily more dramatic. By the end, the monkey appears capable of theft, negotiation, and possibly advanced accounting. The audience laughs. The storyteller accepts no criticism. His monkey remains extraordinary. Historians still argue whether some ancient animal stories preserve accurate observations exaggerated over time, or whether the exaggeration began immediately. Either explanation seems plausible. The fire pops softly. A shower of tiny sparks rises into the night. You look beyond the camp once more. The surrounding darkness feels less empty now, not threatening, simply alive. Somewhere among the rocks, creatures hunt, forage, travel, and survive, much as they have for countless generations. A younger miner points toward a nearby slope. Earlier that day, he says, he spotted a snake warming itself on a rock. The listeners react with interest, respect rather than fear. Desert communities learn quickly which animals deserve caution. Knowledge matters, guessing rarely ends well. Fortunately, tonight the snake appears to have other plans. Perhaps it is enjoying its own quiet evening elsewhere. A fringe tradition occasionally mentioned in discussions of desert cultures suggests that certain animals were viewed as signs of luck, warning, or guidance depending on circumstances. The exact beliefs varied from place to place. Some stories survived, others faded. The natural world often became part of the symbolic world. People searched for meaning in what they observed. A miner quietly mentions seeing unusual tracks near an abandoned work site several years ago. Immediately, the group becomes interested. The tracks, according to his memory, belonged to no familiar animal. Several listeners raise skeptical eyebrows. The storyteller continues anyway. The mystery creature apparently vanished before anyone could investigate properly. Alternative explanations soon emerge. A fox, a damaged track. An overactive imagination, a goat conducting covert operations. That final suggestion receives the strongest support. The storyteller accepts defeat gracefully. The mysterious beast is officially reclassified as a suspicious goat. Scientific progress has been achieved. The night grows deeper still. Many fires have now burned down to glowing embers. Several workers head towards sleeping areas. Others remain seated, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. The desert air feels wonderfully cool. You breathe deeply. The scent of dust, stone, and distant smoke drifts through the darkness. A mainstream historical reality becomes clear to you. People living in ancient mining communities were not separated from nature. They existed within it. Every day involved direct contact with landscape, weather, animals, and changing conditions. Awareness became second nature. Survival encouraged observation. Observation encouraged understanding. And understanding fostered respect. Around you, conversations continue quietly, not about gold, not about labor, simply about the world beyond the firelight. The creatures moving through darkness, the signs hidden in tracks, the rhythms of the desert night, and as the stars wheel slowly overhead, the ancient landscape reveals itself not as empty wilderness, but as a living place filled with countless small lives sharing the cool hours before dawn. The hours drift onward, with the unhurried confidence that only nighttime seems to possess. Most of the camp has settled into sleep now. A few conversations remain scattered among the embers, but they are quiet enough that the desert itself feels like the dominant voice. You sit beside a fire that has become little more than a glowing circle of red and orange light. The warmth reaches you gently. The stars remain brilliant overhead. And somewhere beyond the darkness, tomorrow waits patiently. Yet tonight, thoughts have begun turning toward something larger than tomorrow, toward seasons, toward years, toward the slow rhythms that shape entire lives. An older miner stretches and glances toward the horizon. Everything changes, he says quietly. Then he gestures toward the hills. And somehow everything stays the same. Several listeners nod. Nobody asks for clarification. The meaning feels obvious. Mining camps change, people arrive, people leave, children grow into adults. New shafts are opened, old workings are abandoned, yet the desert endures. The seasons continue, the stars return, the cycle repeats. You begin listening as workers share memories of different years. One remembers a season when caravan traffic seemed endless. Another recalls months when visitors were rare. A third describes unusual weather that remained the subject of discussion long afterward. The stories reveal something important. Life here is not static. Even in a landscape that appears timeless, change is constant. Ancient Nubia experienced seasonal rhythms influenced heavily by the Nile and regional climate patterns. While mining settlements deep within desert zones followed different schedules than river communities, broader environmental changes still shape trade, travel, and daily life. You hear examples everywhere. A miner describes how certain times of year make journeys easier. Another discusses seasonal winds. A traveler recalls occasions when routes became more difficult because of changing conditions. Knowledge of timing matters. The desert rewards preparation. A younger worker asks how long the camp has existed. The question sparks immediate debate. Nobody agrees on the exact answer. One person estimates several decades. Another claims much longer. A third insists his grandfather once argued with someone who remembered an even older version of the settlement. Evidence becomes increasingly difficult to verify. The grandfather, unfortunately, is unavailable for questioning. The listeners enjoy the discussion anyway. Historians still argue whether some ancient mining sites operated continuously for long periods or experienced cycles of abandonment and renewal, depending on economic and environmental conditions. Archaeological evidence often reveals multiple layers of activity. People return to promising places. Gold has a way of attracting repeat visitors. The conversation shifts toward festivals, not necessarily grand public celebrations, but local gatherings marking important moments, successful discoveries, seasonal transitions, family milestones, community events. Human beings create occasions to celebrate wherever they live. The impulse appears universal. One older worker remembers a particularly memorable feast from many years ago. According to his account, the food was excellent, the music lasted all night, and nobody wanted the celebration to end. Another listener immediately points out that every story from the distant past somehow involves superior food. The accusation earns laughter. Merah, it seems, has excellent taste. The elder defends his position vigorously. The feast remains legendary. Historical objectivity is not invited into the discussion. You lean back and watch sparks drift upward. The image feels strangely symbolic. Small lights rising briefly into darkness. Moments appearing and disappearing, like seasons, like years, like people. A breeze moves through camp, carrying cool air across the sleeping settlement. You notice how much the temperature has fallen since sunset. The contrast remains remarkable. Ancient desert communities developed countless strategies for adapting to these daily fluctuations. Clothing, shelter designs, work schedules, everything reflects environmental realities. Adaptation becomes tradition. One miner points toward a distant ridge barely visible beneath the starlight. During certain times of year, he explains, the sunrise aligns differently with the landscape. Another mentions changes in wind patterns. A third discusses signs that experienced travelers use to judge upcoming conditions. The conversation feels almost scientific, observation accumulated over generations. Data preserved through memory. You realize that many traditional societies maintained sophisticated environmental knowledge long before formal scientific institutions existed. People paid attention because their lives depended on it. A fringe tale emerges concerning a season so windy that entire sections of a trail supposedly vanished beneath drifting sand. The story becomes increasingly dramatic. At one point, according to the narrator, a cooking pot disappeared and was not seen again for years. Skepticism appears immediately. The storyteller remains unshaken. The missing pot has become part of local legend. Perhaps somewhere beneath the desert lies a growing collection of historically significant cookware. Archaeologists of the future may be delighted or confused, possibly both. The stars continue moving across the sky. Several listeners begin noticing familiar seasonal markers among the constellations. Discussions follow. Certain stars rising at particular times, certain patterns associated with recurring events. Ancient people often linked celestial observations to practical calendars. The sky functioned as a clock, a calendar, and a source of stories all at once. A mainstream historical fact is that both Nubian and Egyptian societies paid close attention to celestial cycles for agricultural, religious, and practical reasons. Looking upward tonight, that tradition feels entirely understandable. The heavens provide reliable companionship. Empires change, generations pass, the stars return. Gradually, the remaining conversations begin winding down. People yawn, stretch, rise from the fires. The camp settles deeper into silence. Tomorrow's work approaches with steady certainty, but tonight still belongs to reflection, to memory, to the awareness that life unfolds not only through individual days, but through seasons and years flowing together like the Nile itself. And beneath the endless sky of ancient Nubia, you find yourself feeling connected not merely to one evening, but to the long rhythms that shape entire generations. The camp has become almost completely still. A few embers glow among the ashes. The donkeys have finally stopped offering opinions. Even the wind seems to move more gently now, slipping between the dark hills with a soft whisper. You might expect everyone to be asleep. Most are. But near one shelter, a small group remains awake around a low lamp. Their voices are quieter than the evening storytellers, quieter than the musicians, quieter even than the travellers who brought news from distant places. These people are counting. At first, the activity seems oddly ordinary. Then you notice what lies beside them. Small bags, sealed containers, carefully arranged pieces of ore and processed material. Gold, not glittering piles worthy of a fantasy movie. Ancient mining rarely looks like that. Instead, valuable material is gathered, weighed, recorded, and watched with considerable attention. One official lifts a lamp closer to a set of marks scratched onto a writing surface. Another checks a container. A third observes silently. The atmosphere feels calm but focused. Gold may inspire dreams, but administrators prefer numbers. A mainstream historical fact is that Nubian gold was enormously important to regional states, including powerful kingdoms such as Kush and, at various times, Egypt. Precious metal helped support rulers, temples, trade, and political influence across northeastern Africa. Looking at this quiet nighttime accounting session, you can see how grand wealth begins with small, careful records. A miner nearby murmurs that the officials are probably counting the gold for the third time. An older worker replies that if you were responsible for royal treasure, you would count it 4 times. No one argues. The officials continue working. You watch as amounts are checked and rechecked. Containers are sealed, notes are made. The process is methodical rather than dramatic. History often remembers kings, temples, and monuments. It remembers battles and dynasties. It less often remembers the patient people sitting by lamplight, making sure the numbers add up. Yet without them, much of the larger system would wobble alarmingly. One younger worker whispers a joke about becoming an official instead of a miner. Less dust, he says. Another points out that officials still have to explain missing gold. The younger worker immediately withdraws his application. A wise decision, the conversation drifts toward taxes and royal authority. Mining settlements rarely existed completely outside government attention. Valuable resources attracted oversight, regulations, and representatives of larger powers. Exactly how this worked varied across different periods of Nubian history. Some mines may have been closely controlled, others perhaps operated with greater local autonomy. Historians still argue whether certain mining districts were managed primarily by royal institutions, private interests, local communities, or changing combinations of all three. The evidence is fascinating but incomplete. The lamp flickers. One official carefully ties a seal onto a container. Another compares figures one last time. The miners watching nearby seem relaxed. This appears to be a familiar routine. Gold leaves the hills. Records follow the gold. Authority follows both. A traveller mentions seeing larger administrative centres along the Nile, where scribes spend entire days recording goods, taxes, shipments, and deliveries. Several listeners groan sympathetically. Apparently, the idea of endless paperwork existed long before modern offices. Human civilization, it seems, has always contained at least one person asking, "Did anyone remember to write that down?" The answer tonight is yes, very carefully. You glance toward the dark ridges surrounding the camp. Somewhere out there lie the shafts and excavation sites that produce these small amounts of precious metal. The journey from rock to record suddenly feels impressive. First, miners identify promising stone, then workers break and process it, then material is collected, then officials count and seal it. Eventually, it may travel far beyond this desert. A simple chain of human effort connecting hillside labour to distant centres of power. One older miner tells a story about a famous shipment from years ago. The details have clearly grown more dramatic with time. The amount of gold increases slightly each time someone retells the tale. By next century, it may require its own caravan, orchestra, and ceremonial parade. The listeners laugh knowingly. Exaggeration is apparently another valuable local resource. The officials finish one set of records and begin another. Their concentration never breaks. You realize that trust in a mining economy depends heavily on procedures like these. People need ways to measure, verify, and account for valuable goods. Ancient states developed surprisingly sophisticated administrative systems to manage resources, labor, and taxation. The quiet scene before you is part of that larger story. A fringe rumor circulates among some miners about hidden royal stores of gold buried somewhere in the desert. Naturally, everyone has heard a different version. Naturally, everyone knows someone whose relative almost found it. Naturally, no one can produce the treasure itself. The rumor persists anyway. Gold seems to generate legends as reliably as it generates accounting. The lamp burns lower. One official stretches his back and suppresses a yawn. Another carefully stores the completed records. The work is nearly done. Around them, the sleeping camp breathes softly beneath the stars. Most people will remember this evening for the food, stories, songs, and cool desert air. A few will remember the counting, yet both belong together. The warmth of community and the structure of administration, the laughter around the fire and the careful tally by lamplight. Ancient societies needed both. And as the final container is sealed and set aside, you understand that the gold of Nubia travels through many hands before it ever reaches a king, a temple, or a distant market. Tonight, it rests quietly under watchful eyes while the desert sleeps around it. The officials finally finish their work. The records are stored, the containers are secured, the lamp burns low. One by one, the remaining figures drift away into the darkness toward their sleeping places. Now the camp is truly quiet. Not silent, never silent, the desert always keeps a few sounds for itself. A distant breeze, the faint shift of sand, the occasional creak of rope or shelter material. Small reminders that the world continues moving even while people sleep. You remain awake a little longer. The stars overhead seem brighter than ever. The night has reached that peculiar hour when time feels suspended. Not quite yesterday, not quite tomorrow, simply now. A few older miners sit near fading embers, speaking so softly that you almost miss their conversation. They are discussing old workings, abandoned mines, forgotten camps, places swallowed by time. The topic feels perfectly suited to the hour. The desert is full of such places. For every active settlement, countless others have vanished. Some exhausted their resources, some lost access to water. Some were abandoned when trade routes shifted. Others simply faded from memory. Ancient mining landscapes often contain layers upon layers of human activity stretching across centuries. You look toward the surrounding hills. Somewhere among those shadows lie traces of people long gone. Workers who once watched the same stars, listened to the same wind, sat beside similar fires. Now only fragments remain. A collapsed wall, a broken tool, a forgotten path. History can be surprisingly fragile. One miner points toward a ridge barely visible beneath the moonlight. Years ago, he says, travelers discovered evidence of an older camp there, stone foundations, fragments of pottery, signs of long-vanished activity. The discovery sparked considerable discussion. Who lived there? How long ago? Why did they leave? The answers prove difficult to find. Historians face similar challenges today. Archaeology often reveals clues without providing complete stories. The evidence speaks, just not always clearly. A younger listener asks whether lost mines still exist. The older workers exchange amused glances. Of course they do. At least according to local stories, every mining region seems to produce legends about forgotten deposits waiting to be rediscovered. Some tales are probably true, others are probably wishful thinking wrapped in excellent storytelling. The distinction remains delightfully uncertain. One elder recalls hearing about a shaft uncovered after a storm exposed previously buried ground. The account sounds plausible. Desert environments constantly reshape themselves through wind and weather. Fots appear, fots disappear. The landscape edits its own history. Historians still argue whether certain ancient mining sites remain undiscovered beneath accumulated sand and debris, waiting for future archaeological work to reveal them. Given the scale of ancient mining activity across parts of Nubia, the possibility seems entirely reasonable. The desert has hidden many things. It may still be hiding more. A breeze drifts through camp. The embers glow softly. You find yourself imagining the countless generations connected to these hills. Workers carrying tools before sunrise, families gathering around fires, travelers arriving with news, children listening to stories, officials counting gold. All of it repeated again and again across centuries, yet individual lives pass quickly. The contrast feels strangely comforting. The hills endure, the stars endure, people contribute their chapter and move on. One miner describes a curious discovery made near an old excavation many years earlier. A hammerstone. Nothing remarkable at first glance, except that it had clearly been used by someone centuries before. Imagine holding an object last touched by a worker whose name disappeared long ago. The thought captures everyone's attention. The tool becomes more than a tool, it becomes a connection, a handshake across time. Archaeologists experience this feeling often. A simple object suddenly makes the past feel personal. You glance at the repaired tools resting nearby. Perhaps someday they too will survive longer than their owners. Perhaps future generations will wonder about the people who used them. History rarely announces which objects will become important. A fringe story soon emerges involving an entire hidden settlement, supposedly buried beneath dunes somewhere beyond the mining districts. The details are magnificent. Stone buildings, lost treasure, mysterious carvings. Naturally, nobody can locate the place. Naturally, someone claims a relative nearly found it. Naturally, a suspiciously talented goat appears somewhere in the narrative. The listeners laugh. Some traditions refuse to disappear. The legendary goat has achieved immortality. The storyteller continues anyway. At this hour, accuracy feels less important than atmosphere. The stars shine. The embers glow. The mystery is enough. A mainstream historical reality remains clear beneath the legend. Ancient Nubia possessed a long and complex history that archaeologists continue exploring today. New discoveries still emerge, new interpretations appear. Questions remain unanswered. The past is not finished revealing itself. The thought lingers pleasantly. Even now, somewhere beneath desert sand, traces of forgotten lives may be waiting. A child's toy, a fragment of pottery, an abandoned shelter, a lost pathway, small things capable of reopening entire stories. The final embers begin fading. One by one, the remaining listeners rise. Yawns spread through the group. The hour has grown late. Tomorrow's labor approaches. The old stories, the mysteries, and the unanswered questions can wait. The desert has kept them this long. It can keep them a little longer. And as the last voices disappear into the sleeping camp, the ancient landscape settles into profound stillness, holding its secrets beneath the stars and carrying them gently toward another dawn. The camp sleeps, not completely. A place like this is never entirely asleep. Somewhere a watchful figure shifts position beside a dying fire. Somewhere an animal stirs beyond the ring of shelters. Somewhere a traveller rolls over beneath a blanket and dreams of distant roads, but compared with the lively evening you have just experienced, the settlement has become wonderfully still. The fires have collapsed into soft circles of glowing embers. The tools rest where they were carefully stored. The gold has been counted. The stories have been told. The songs have drifted away into memory. and above everything stretches the vast Nubian sky. You sit quietly and watch. The stars seem almost impossibly bright. Generations of miners have looked upward at this same view, long before tonight. Long before these particular camps existed, long before the names of current rulers were spoken, the stars watched over them all. There is something comforting in that thought. The day that felt so important this morning now feels small. Not unimportant, just complete. Its work has been done, its worries have been set aside, its conversations have found their endings. You think back over the hours. The hammer strikes echoing across rocky slopes. The endless sunlight reflecting from stone, the careful sharing of water, the laughter around evening meals, the songs carried on the breeze, the stories told by travellers, the lessons passed to children, the quiet prayers, the repaired tools, the mysterious tales of forgotten mines. Each moment connected to the next. Each part of a larger rhythm. Ancient mining communities were built from such rhythms, not merely from gold. Gold attracted attention. Gold attracted rulers. Gold attracted merchants. But daily life was built from people, from friendships, from routines, from small acts repeated across years. A mainstream historical truth, often hidden beneath stories of kings and treasures, is that ordinary workers shaped history every bit as surely as famous rulers did. Without miners, there would be no gold to count. Without families, there would be no communities. Without evenings like these, there would be no continuity between generations. The desert wind moves softly through the camp. A shelter cloth flutters. Then stillness returns. You glance toward the surrounding hills. The dark ridges seem almost protective now. Earlier they appeared harsh, demanding, relentless. Yet tonight, they simply rest beneath the stars. Historians still argue whether some ancient mining districts were occupied more continuously than current evidence suggests, or whether long periods of abandonment separated bursts of activity. The debate continues. The hills remain silent. Perhaps they know the answer. Perhaps they are enjoying the mystery. The thought makes you smile. Far away, a nightbird calls once, then quiet returns. You notice how different the desert feels now, compared with the heat of the afternoon. The same landscape, the same rocks, the same horizon, yet transformed completely by darkness. Ancient people understood this dual nature, intimately. The desert challenged them, then comforted them, demanded effort, then offered peace. The balance shaped daily life. A final few embers collapse inward. Tiny sparks drift upward. For a brief moment they resemble miniature stars rising to join the real ones overhead. Then they vanish. You find yourself thinking about the forgotten workers discussed earlier. The people whose names disappeared while their tools survived. The families who once gathered around fires now long extinguished. The children who listened to stories and grew old beneath these skies. Most are gone, yet traces remain. A path through stone, a discarded tool, a memory carried forward. History survives through fragments, and sometimes fragments are enough. A fringe local tale claims that on particularly quiet nights, if you sit among abandoned workings and listen carefully, you can almost hear the distant echoes of old mining camps carried on the wind. The story is probably more poetic than literal. Probably. Still, tonight, beneath this immense sky, you understand why people tell it. Some places feel full of memory. The desert is one of them. The camp settles even deeper into silence. Sleep spreads gently across the settlement. Tomorrow will bring another dawn, another walk into the hills, another day of labor, another evening beneath the stars. The cycle continues, steady, reliable, familiar. And now, as the final moments of the night unfold around you, the pace begins to slow even further. The thoughts become quieter. The images softer, the desert wider, the stars more distant and more beautiful. The hills seem to breathe with the darkness. The wind moves lightly across stone that has known thousands of sunsets and thousands of dawns. You no longer think about gold. Not really. The gold remains hidden within the earth where it has rested for ages. Instead, you think about the people, the miners sharing bread after work, the children listening to stories, the travellers bringing news from faraway places. The elders remembering seasons long gone, the craftsmen repairing tools beneath moonlight, the officials counting precious metal by lamplight, all of them part of the same quiet world, all of them resting now beneath the same sky. And as the desert settles around you, The night seems to stretch endlessly in every direction. The stars drift slowly westward. The air cools a little more. The remaining embers glow like tiny islands of warmth, surrounded by darkness. You breathe slowly. The landscape feels peaceful, ancient pet, unhurried. Nothing needs to happen right now. Nothing needs to be solved. The mysteries of forgotten minds can wait. The caravans can continue their journeys tomorrow. The hills can keep their secrets. Tonight is simply for resting, for listening, for letting the vast stillness of Nubia wrap gently around the camp like a blanket. The wind softens, the darkness deepens, and the stars continue their silent journey overhead. The night grows quieter still. The last glow of the embers fades into a soft red shimmer, barely visible now, like a distant memory refusing to disappear completely. Around you, the sleeping camp rests peacefully beneath the endless heavens. No voices remain, no tools move, no footsteps cross the ground. Only the desert, only the stars, only the slow passage of time. You let your gaze wander across the horizon one final time. The hills rest where they have always rested. Ancient and patient, the pathways between them lie empty now, waiting for tomorrow's travelers and workers. The mines themselves sleep beneath layers of stone, holding their hidden gold quietly in the darkness. The breeze becomes gentler, cooler, softer. It carries no urgent message, no warning, no demand. Just the simple comfort of moving air beneath a sky filled with light above. The constellations drift silently onward. The same stars that guided travelers, inspired storytellers, and watched over generations of miners who lived and worked in these lands long ago. You imagine them sleeping peacefully too, their work complete, their worries set aside, their stories still lingering somewhere in the vast memory of the desert. And now the camp, the hills, the stars, and the wind seem to blend together into one calm and endless scene. Nothing rushes, nothing presses, everything simply is. The desert remains, the sky remains, the quiet remains. And as the night stretches onward beneath those distant stars, you can let your thoughts drift farther and farther away, becoming lighter, slower, softer with every passing moment, until there is only stillness, only peace, only the gentle silence of ancient Nubia beneath the stars.